Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show, and every week I get to have great conversations with CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of different companies, ranging from Netflix, Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable, many more. I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And this is part of our top agency founder series, where we interview interesting agency owners and agency experts talking about some of the strategies that they are using to be successful today. And I want to give a quick shout out to Karl Smith of Bureau of Digital, who helped to introduce me to today's guest. And his name is Karl Sakas. He helps agency owners to grow profitably so they can work less and earn more. Who doesn't want that, right? He's personally advised hundreds of agencies in every inhabited continent. He's also the author of Made to Lead, the in-demand marketing agency, and more than 400 articles on agency management. And fun fact, when he's not helping clients, Karl volunteers as a bartender on an antique train. How often do you hear that? Not very often, right? So, Karl, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Of course, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. If you are curious about how to do that, contact us at support@rise25media.com. And Karl, you got this great backstory. You're in high school. You are working at, you're attending high school. You grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. I was born in D.C. area as well. You're going to Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, and the web is just developing. And you start as a little side hustle building websites on the side. I love that because I didn't have my act together in high school. I certainly wasn't earning any money. I worked at a ribs restaurant, but that doesn't really
all the ribs you could eat.
It helped my waistline back then. Doesn't really help my job skills today. So I love that you were designing websites. But how did you get into that?
Learned HTML in a class freshman year. I was lucky to go to a STEM, science, technology, engineering, math high school, and learned HTML freshman year. So this was in the mid to late 90s. And beyond just the class itself, I was like, oh, this is fun, right? Let me do more of this. And so I started building websites for nonprofits and small businesses in the DC area. And, people seemed to like it. And I kept getting referrals to more businesses. This was back in the days of dial-up and Internet Explorer 3 and 640 by 480 monitors. So actually a testimonial from a client back in the day that I was really good with search engine submittals, back when SEO was you submit to the directory kind of.
Yeah. That was very sophisticated SEO back then.
Yes.
Fun fact, around the same time, I'm working in the Clinton White House, also in the DC area. And that might sound glamorous, but at the time it's the .com boom. All my friends from college had gone on and was working for all these exciting .coms in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I taught myself HTML and how to create websites, and actually created some websites on the side while I was working at the White House. But I wasn't smart enough to actually get clients and get paid to do it. I was actually just burning up a lot of time. So how are you as a high school student? You knocking on doors to these nonprofits and getting them to hire you? How did that come about? Do you remember how you got your first clients?
So within the freelance work, I actually had two segments. I did computer training and troubleshooting, which included businesses, but a lot of it was individuals, right? It was help, how to send photos to the grandkids, or the printer isn't working and what do we do? And then on the business side, that was people, need a website kind of thing. On the personal side, it was all referral. Like thinking my German teacher needed help with her printer. She was like, could you help me with that? Hired me to do that, referred me to a friend who referred me to another friend who knew a bunch of people. And it just went from there. Thinking of DC, I was referred to a client at the Watergate Apartments. And at one point, living in Northern Virginia, my dad had offered to drop me off for the appointment. And I guess he was waiting in the lobby and apparently meets Bob Dole, who lives there.
Yeah.
So sort of the, unexpected. He did not become a web design client.
No, that's too bad.
But, kind of thing. So sort of connecting with different businesses, and your thing of like, why was I doing that? I am a multi-generation entrepreneur. So my parents had a small real estate business doing rental property management after they were both career Army officers. My grandfather was a business professor and management consultant for 40 some years. So business was normal.
So it wasn't abnormal for you to naturally, like, I learned a skill, go out and see if someone will pay me for it.
Yes, like in elementary school, my parents put us, I'm the oldest of 5 kids, they put us to work helping with rental properties, things like painting and, clean outs and things like that. And so, the idea of business and negotiating with different stakeholders and all just seemed normal.
Yeah, I got 4 kids. The oldest is only 10, but I got to get him to work. That sounds smart. I like that idea.
You'll have to decide, the ideal, of course, is incentive alignment. What is something he wants to do that also matches what ideally you need him to do? But I am an expert on agencies, not on parenting advice. So I know my limits.
Yeah. So this takes you go to college, you continue to do this on the side. Tell me a little bit about, the typical agency owner story is you get busier and busier and busier, and then you have to figure out how to manage it all because it's too much work and you don't get to take a break ever. Did you go through that whole cycle?
To a point. I mean, I was, in school full time, high school, and then in college. I was doing a lot in college. I was doing a lot of the client work, either when I was home in the DC area, or a lot of it I was doing remotely. One of the client testimonials I saw was that, and I'd forgotten about this, we'd worked together for like 2 years before I ever met her in person.
Wow, that's unusual for that period of time because it was so much harder to do things remotely. How did you manage to do these things remotely? Was it because you were designing a website remotely and you just never saw them?
That was part of it. Okay. So we communicate by phone, by email. I was using, the FTP application to upload the files
Nightmare.
to the host. And you want to edit the menu, you edit it in every single page, kind of thing. Thankfully, not the case anymore.
Such a pain in the butt.
Of course, remotely you sometimes get into trouble. I had a troubleshooting client, like computer setup and this and that, and she said that her printer stopped working. And it was about a 45-minute drive. So I was like, let me see if I can do this by phone. So I asked the troubleshooting questions. I was working through it. And it quickly became clear that it was something USB related because everything running through the USB hub wasn't working. So I asked, to confirm the plug, is that plugged in? She said, yes. So we kept going through. And what I eventually realized, in retrospect, I probably should have just driven out there and dealt with it in person. She had plugged the USB cable diagonally into the Ethernet networking port.
Got it.
I did not know that was possible. But
hard to troubleshoot that one.
That's the thing. Like, the power of experience. The longer you do something, the more you realize, what are the patterns and also what are the abnormal things.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And did you hire people during this time period, or was it mostly just you?
It was just me. I had decided I like doing this, kind of a challenge that a lot of agency owners have. Clients like working with them. You've structured things so you're doing everything yourself and it's hard to delegate. If I were doing it differently, well, I was also a full-time college student. So it was sort of a, graduate
kind
from
of side hustle. Yeah.
But, certainly, there's one client that found me out of the blue. It was a trade association in DC related to financial services. And I got a call from them saying, we found your resume and we see that PageMaker. I was in college. And I was like, yeah, I used Adobe PageMaker, now in design. as the online editor for the high school newspaper, getting the newspaper online every week.
Oh, I did something like that. We used Quark Express at my high school newspaper.
Yeah, exactly. So they were like, we want to take our newsletter and put it, do it instead of, using Microsoft Word. And they're like, what would you charge to train us on it? So at the time I was charging $35 an hour. This was circa 2002.
That's excellent for a high school student. College student. Yeah, excellent.
Well, so what happened was, and they were like, so what would you charge for that? I was thinking to myself, do I even remember enough about PageMaker to do this? So my solution was, I said, I'd like to come in and meet with you to see what is your current setup, what are your goals, this and that. And effectively I stalled. And I figured if I go in and see the way they have things set up, I would see, do I remember enough of this to train them on it?
Yeah.
I took the metro into DC, met at the office. They showed, I was like, oh, okay, this is very straightforward. I can totally do this. And then they asked what I would charge. Remember, I'd been charging everyone else $35 an hour at that point. And the number that popped into my head, I said $75 an hour. And they said yes, very quickly. I was like, oh, maybe I could have charged more. Like with inflation, that would be a bit over $100 an hour.
Yeah, that's phenomenal for college student. Yeah.
But that was a case where they knew nothing about PageMaker. They needed help with it, and it was high value. Ultimately, they had large number of members, and they wanted to communicate more effectively with them. I think that speaks to the power of at least value anchoring. Whether value-based pricing or value anchoring, it was worth $75 an hour.
Sure. Talk about, for those who don't know, what that is, the difference between value-based pricing, value anchoring, those two.
Sure. Well, there are three agency pricing models: hourly, milestone, and value-based. Hourly is you're charging time and materials. Milestone is you're charging by deliverable, whether by project or by retainer. And then value-based is ultimately about charging for the results, whether that's a performance fee or a royalty or something along those lines. And you can mix and match the different types and different pros and cons. Going to value-based pricing is a challenge because you need to be confident about the value you'll deliver, because you don't want to invest hundreds or thousands of hours of work only to not get results, right? So value-based makes sense if it's something that your agency is really confident about doing, and you're also confident about what it's going to take to get it done.
And to use a simple example, let's say like a website. If you know that this website's going to be worth whatever, $100,000 to a company, and you charge them $50,000, even though on an hourly basis you could probably get it done in $1,000, that's value-based pricing for a website.
It could be, at minimum, it's value anchoring. So value anchoring would be just that, to say, okay, it's worth $100,000. Say they're going to make $100,000 a year, we'll charge you $50,000, and then you keep the difference after that. For instance, I'm in the midst of developing a project management training, PM 101, which I think might be available by the time the episode is going live. And the idea is that project management is not fun for most people, even having been a former project manager. The thought is, if your agency charges $150 an hour, you should save at least, or you sort of a value of $1,500 or more, and the course is a fraction of that. That would be value anchoring, to say you're going to get way more in value, even conservatively, and it could be even more, but good news, the price is a lot lower.
Right.
So agencies can do that in their work as well.
Okay. So did we cover all three then? So hourly, milestone, and the third one?
Value-based. And it is worth considering. There is a lot of, like, oh, you should never charge hourly. And indeed, if you can charge on a milestone or value-based basis, that is ideal, because that's connecting the outcome, or at minimum the output of the work, rather than solely the time it took to go in. But there is at least one case where it makes sense to do hourly, which is if you're doing something for the first time, something you have never done before, you can't accurately predict what the milestone scope would be and what it would cost to get it done and things like that. Yeah. So in that case, if you've never done it before, or it's something that is totally open-ended, hourly makes more sense. But then the goal is to eventually get to milestone.
Right. Now, you touch on project management in this world and in this digital agency world that we exist in. I was interviewing Ben Cash from Reason One Agency yesterday on my podcast, and we were talking about how really over the last 20 years, this is a brand new industry. It's an industry of companies that are creating products that didn't exist 25 years ago. So talk a little bit about what it was like, what it's been like for you, particularly in the early 2000s, to be in this very much evolving nascent industry.
Well, it is one of those, things are always changing. One of the questions I'll ask when I'm hiring, there'll be a question of what do you do for professional development? And that's a thing where it almost doesn't matter what people put, but they need to put something, right? If people aren't keeping up, they're going to get behind. But part of that also includes choosing where to specialize, right? So if you're an agency owner, you don't necessarily need to be an expert on every single thing. The latest JavaScript changes, the latest in design systems, the latest in this or that. But you do need to know enough so that you can manage the people or manage the people who are managing the people to get the work done, right? You need to know enough to oversee things. So, I guess my key advice there would be keep up in general and then hire people who love their individual area even more than you do. And then, point them in the right direction and let them make it happen for you.
And I know that, after you graduated from college, you had a couple of stints at a couple of different, an investment fund, it looks like. And then you become a director of operations for a Raleigh web design and marketing agency. By this time, you've moved down to Raleigh, North Carolina. What was it like for you in those initial stages of moving into that role? Because being a director of operations, overseeing a large team, managing multiple people, all those are big challenges to learn.
For sure. And that role was a promotion. So I started as a director of client services, which, there are 6 agency roles that I've identified. I was doing a bunch of them. I was doing account management. I was doing project management. I was doing some subject matter expert work, and I was doing client strategy. Sometimes I was helping with biz dev and then eventually moved into support doing operations. So, there's always a bit of juggling. The good news is the work that I did helped me sort out what do I like doing, what do I not like doing. In general, I'm more on the project management side rather than the account management side. So that helped, I think, move toward operations.
For those who don't know, explain the difference between those.
Sure. The way I define it, account management is keep your clients happy and typically sell them more work. They are the voice of the client within the agency, but they still work for the agency. The goal is to find some sort of a win-win, but don't forget that you do work for the agency, not directly for the client. Project management tends to be more internally oriented, and PM is primarily about get the work done smoothly and profitably. That's not to say that PMs can never be client-facing. They usually are. But PM is more internally focused. Get things coordinated, get things done so that it happens. And there's often overlap. When agencies are smaller, they'll have one person who's doing both, account management and project management. The problem is, and you've probably seen this, and I imagine people who are watching and listening seen this. People tend to skew one way or the other. So maybe someone who's AM oriented, great with relationships, everyone loves them, but maybe they're not great on details. Mm-hmm. Or someone leans more toward project management, great on the details, this and that, but not as good about, say, doing upsells or, building stronger relationships. So the ideal is to specialize. You have someone who's doing only account management and another person who's doing only project management. That lets people excel at what they do best rather than putting people in a situation where they're struggling.
And do you believe that there comes a time with each agency where they must bifurcate those two roles, the account management and project management? I do know some agency owners who they've gotten to a certain level with people that, with team members that are doing both, but it always seems like they're screaming and they're kind of like, I don't know if I'm doing this right.
Yeah. I believe that most things in life are relative. So it's not you have to split account management and project management. But if your agency's model is to keep the roles combined, be aware that some people are going to skew one way or the other, and look at ways to give them extra support. So for instance, as a project manager, where I was also doing account management, I would talk to our salesperson. If I was running into a difficult client conversation, I would talk things through with him first. Say, here's what I'm thinking of doing. And he'd usually have ideas, because he was a more relationship-oriented person, ideas to help me out. And you know what? I helped him on sorting through details. So it was a win-win for each of us and for the agency. So if you don't split it, if you don't do the bifurcation AM and PM, make sure you're giving the support you need to your team, because most employees are not magical unicorns who can do everything amazingly. Don't expect that.
Right. Now, another difference of opinion, I guess you could call it, in the agency world is whether to organize your team in terms of pods. Can you talk about that model and how that works?
Yeah, I do like pods, but they are not right for every agency. So the idea of a pod is that you've got almost a self-contained agency within a team. The exact makeup of the pod will depend on your services and various other factors, but usually there'll be someone doing account management, someone doing project management, and then someone doing strategy. That could be the account manager, it could be someone else, and then a mix of subject matter experts. So it could be people doing SEO analysis and implementation, could be PPC, could be copywriting, could be design, could be development. And you also might have some people who work across pods. So for instance, if you do video occasionally, but it's not something you're doing every day, you might have a videographer on the team who works across the pods, like they'll help out as needed. But the idea of the pod is that they have a dedicated set of clients that they are working with on an ongoing basis. So the clients know them, they know the client, this and that, and they're working together. So it's almost like an agency within an agency. The downside to that is if you've got, say, 3 pods, one of the pods, has a surge in workload, or another pod has a drop in workload, say a client pauses something or something like that. You can't automatically load balance that. You can't say, all right, we're going to take this designer, we're going to put them on the other team, or we're going to, this and that.
More complicated.
What's that?
It's more complicated in order to balance the workloads.
It is. Now, one of my views is that it's hard for agencies to be profitable with significantly more than 20 active clients. The exception to that is if you use a pod structure. Because if you have more than 20 clients, usually you're going to have a client dilution problem. That is, a client is, half of 1% of your revenue because you've got 100 clients and, different sizes, but they want 5% of your team's time. They're not paying for that kind of thing. Having pods can fix some of the client dilution problem, though it can also worsen what I would call the client concentration problem, where you have more than 20% of your business from one client. If you've got someone in a pod and the client is like half of the revenue for the pod and you lose the client, you're probably going to have to lay people off unless you make some really rapid changes and some luck on your pipeline.
Unless you move clients from one pod to another, or would that not?
You could, but that defeats some of the purpose of the pod, of having the continuity, right? You're saying to the client, you've got your dedicated strategist, your dedicated account manager. If you're telling the client, hey, we're switching AMs on you. Yeah. It's like, why? Yeah. And you're like, oh, we got some internal, whatever. That's not the client's fault.
We lost the client in this other pod. Got to balance stuff out.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, in general, my view is that your clients generally shouldn't hear about other clients to the extent that it negatively impacts the client you're talking to, right? They know you have other clients. I'll share different examples from my work, anonymized, right? If someone's dealing with something, I say, another client was struggling with that last week. Here's what we talked through, right? Kind of thing. More of a, you're not in this alone. Yeah. But I would never say to a client, and people are listening, I need to move your meeting next week because another client came in. It's like, that's not their problem.
Yes, right.
Now, you are able to use that if it's something specific to the client. So I had a client, this was as an agency PM, he had made a request that I assigned to one of our developers. And then the client had another request, which unfortunately could only be fulfilled by that specific developer, whom the client knew, they had talked. And I said, well, glad to do that. So-and-so is the one who'd be doing it. Would you like us to keep on the original path, do the first thing first, then the second, or do you need to accelerate this new request? That's a technique, by the way, that I call reason options choose, a negotiation technique. Cite a reason. Hey, we'd love to do it. Just one person is able to do that. Two options, keep with the original order or swap it, and then let him choose.
And it's nice because they feel like they're in control to a certain extent.
Yes, although that particular client, his response was, Karl, I hate it when you make me choose. But you know what? He did choose. And we got it done and we kept him as a client.
I mean, generally, people like choices, right? So
yeah,
it's kind of probably unusual. What about, you talked about the client concentration problem. And, I've interviewed a lot of hundreds of business owners over the years. And it's shocking, but you hear all the time about people that have clients that that make up 40%, 50%, 80% of their revenue. What do you recommend to agencies when they find themselves falling into that scenario?
Well, first, I approach it from a perspective of compassion, right? Like, people know it's not a good idea. They usually do not choose intentionally to make that happen. I think sometimes there's sort of this idea of like, oh, why did you do that? They did it because they needed the money. The client was willing to spend more money.
Yeah,
they were probably struggling to make time for business development to keep bringing in fresh new business rather than solely the upsell. So I think a key thing is, from a compassion standpoint, it's like, it happened for a reason or a set of reasons. Okay. Now let's fix it going forward. What do they want going forward? Then we'll find a solution. Usually it involves amping up their business development, so their marketing, their sales, and their partnerships work to bring in additional business to reduce the percentage of that client, in their business. It's really tough. If someone came to me wanting help and they had 80% of their business from one client, I'm not sure I could help them. There are things I could do, but it's going to take a long time. I mean, imagine if you wanted to get that 80% down to 20%.
Yeah. Like, you need 2 more or 3 more 80% clients of the same size.
Yeah. So, in that case, it's really more of a triage perspective of, okay, you need to amp up your marketing, your own marketing, shoemaker's kids problem. And then, get new business in, but then they still need to fulfill it. There is one opportunity, which is, oftentimes, if you have a client concentration client, it's usually the agency's longest term or one of their longest term clients. And usually the client is at some sort of a legacy rate. I've done a lot of work with agencies lately, helping them raise prices for their clients. Mm-hmm. In one case, an agency said they hadn't raised one of their clients' prices in 6 years.
Wow.
When I became a director of client services at that first agency, I learned one of my first jobs was to raise our prices 30%. I don't think they had mentioned that when I started at the agency. But
they just dropped it on your lap, like, oh, by the way, this is what you need to do.
They'd been charging $95 an hour, but don't do that. And then my job was to sell everyone on why to pay $125 an hour.
And how did you go about it? Did you get each client on the phone and say, hi, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm the new director of client services and your rates are going up. Nice to meet you. Have a great day.
I may have waited a week or two, something like that. But the good news was a lot of people had been at that $95 an hour price since the agency started. So the fact that they'd been at that low rate for a while,
Does that make it easier? Does that make it easier that they've been at a lower rate for a long time? Because some agency owners think like, oh, they've been at this rate for so long, it's going to make it that much harder.
So I approach this from a portfolio perspective. Look at your entire list of clients. I have a tool that I built for this. I call it the client ranking matrix, where you load all your clients in, you look at their current value, high, medium, low, and their future potential, high, medium, low. And that'll help you sort out, is this a client you want to grow? Is this a client you want to leave as is? Is this a client that you should prepare to lose, or a client that you should fire? That based on that combo, you can decide, if you've got a client concentration problem, maybe you'd either raise them a small amount or maybe keep them the same. but you tell them that new people are paying more, right? The rate has gone up for new people. They're locked in for this period of time. That's what I describe as strategically free or strategically discounted. Strategically free is okay, but don't be secretly free. Don't let them think they're getting this deal that they need to realize they're getting a special deal if they're getting a continued special deal. So the portfolio approach is sorting out who's getting a high increase, who's medium, low. I mean, every client is a unique situation. So that portfolio approach is, rather than saying everyone pays an extra 10% or an extra 50%, or everyone stays the same, you're deciding based on each client, based on your experience with them. If they're a client that you don't enjoy working with, they probably need a nuisance fee. You know, if working with them wouldn't be as annoying if they paid you an extra 20%, that's the deal. And if they don't want to pay the extra 20%, then they're not worth it. So that portfolio approach is looking at the overall portfolio of clients and doing a diversified approach. But regardless, everyone does need to know, whether their price goes up or not, that the new rate is X for new clients, and they're getting some sort of a special deal, but that doesn't last forever. So if you're listening, if you want to raise prices, tell clients sooner rather than later
that your rates
because
are right. Yeah.
It goes over a lot better if they hear, oh, they're locked in at the current rate for 3 months, 6 months, 4 months, whatever, rather than their rate is going up tomorrow.
And let me be devil's advocate here. So I'm listening to this. I'm an agency owner, and you're saying I should send an email to this client that's been with me for however long, period of time. They've been paying a lower rate. I don't want to rock the boat. You want me to send them an email saying, hey, FYI, that rate you're paying is sweetheart deal. I'm going to keep doing it for 6 months, but after then, our current rate is X. I mean, I guess the fear would be that what if the client just quits right then and there as a result of that email? It pisses them off.
Well, first, don't send an email. Don't send that as an email. That's definitely a conversation. So yeah, if anyone's like, oh, I don't want to talk about without the client, I'm going to send an email. That will be a self-fulfilling prophecy. That is not news to deliver via email. But I know you're using it as an example. Ideal is sharing it in conversation, preferably in an existing call that you have with the client. Toward the end, say, but by the way, we've been at the same rate for 4 years, 2 years, 3 years, whatever the case may be. We are raising rates for new clients effective immediately. Pause for a moment because they're going to be like, uh-oh. And then you can say, we enjoy working with you. We're actually going to give you an extension on your current rate for such and such period of time. And you have the option of saying, the new rate would normally be such and such, but we're willing to give you a 15% discount off that new rate. So the idea is you're paying something in the middle. So maybe they've been paying $125 an hour, new clients are $200 an hour. You could say you're locked in at $125 for 3 months. And then instead of paying $200 an hour, you'll get a 25% discount and pay $150 an hour.
And that helps to soften the blow a little bit, I guess.
Yes. And of course, not every client is going to, I don't know if anyone likes their prices going up, but, ultimately, if they realize they've been getting a good deal, it's going to go over better than if they feel entitled to their crazy low pricing.
Right. Yeah. The other thing I want to ask about with this portfolio approach, I love that my business partner, Jeremy, always talks about and I forget who he quotes this as saying this, but he always talks about the scariest number in business is one anything, one big client, one industry that you serve, one geography that you serve. And the last 18 months of the pandemic has really demonstrated to us how sometimes it can be unexpected what parts of the economy you needed to diversify in a way that you didn't realize. It could be geographically. Like I interviewed an owner of restaurants who he didn't even think about this beforehand, but he had 14 restaurants locations, and they were in New York and New Jersey. And you'd think, okay, that's pretty good diversification. Well, a bunch of them were in the financial district. Pandemic hits, people aren't going to work, they're working from home. There's no housing around that area. So all those restaurants did really poorly. So talk to me a little bit about how agency owners and by extension business owners should be thinking about diversification, not just in regards to one large client, but other areas like geography or industry or niche or vertical or however you want to define it?
From a risk management perspective, when I'm helping clients to evaluate new options, new direction, I'll recommend that they prepare in two areas. What is likely to happen? And what are the things that may not be likely to happen, but would be catastrophic if they did? For instance, when I lived in New Jersey, I had flood insurance on my house. I was not in a flood zone, but I knew that my homeowner's insurance wouldn't cover flood damage if there was flooding. And so for $400 a year, I could get the flood insurance coverage. So that was a case where, the odds of something happening were low, but it would have been pretty bad. So for $400 a year, that was totally worth it. On the other hand, if we look at, what is something that may not be quite as catastrophic, but, is likely to happen, thinking of, say your team, one of your employees will eventually quit to get a new job. So one solution to that is to do, I call it always be recruiting. Glenn Ross is always be closing. There are pros and cons on that, mostly cons. But, if you're always looking to connect with people who might be a match to help your agency, or might be, you might be able to help other agencies you work with, things like that. Suddenly you're not going to suddenly panic when someone inevitably resigns. You can also build, for instance, a stable of freelancers. Ideally, you have 3 to 5 people in each skill area, 3 to 5 writers, 3 to 5 designers, and so on, so that if someone does leave, because everyone will eventually leave, generally, you're not panicking because you've got someone who can help in at least an interim basis. That also includes, ideally, you have at least 2 people at the agency that are contacts for each client. That would be a primary and a secondary. Maybe the account manager is the primary, the project manager is the backup, so that if the AM or the PM leave, you've got someone else providing coverage on things. That doesn't mean you have to have everyone attending every single meeting, that kind of thing. But again, the risk management is, if it is likely to happen, prepare for that. If it is unlikely, but it would be really bad, prepare for that. Kind of like the $400 for the flood insurance in a very low risk flood zone.
Right. And we're getting a little short on time here, but this pandemic has been crazy. What was it like for you? Take us back to March, April 2020. We know how were your clients affected? What were some ways in which they and you, with your assistant, they got through all of this?
It was difficult for most agencies. Some exceptions, like ones that were e-commerce oriented, though even then there were still some challenges. Client mentioned that they had a client, e-commerce site at their agency that did jigsaw puzzles. They paused their marketing spend because they were sold out. They had no more jigsaw puzzles to sell, and they weren't going to get any more.
Wow.
It didn't make sense to, run PPC for stuff you can't
so
fulfill.
You can land people on your website. There's nothing they can buy.
Yeah. That's another was a client that sold like dehydrated camping food. They were sold out. There was nothing more to sell. So, most agencies were struggling. But here's the thing. The sort of the complex systems that we have, today. Great book on that, Meltdown, Why Our Systems Fail and What We Can Do About It, Meltdown. But one of the things there is I run, outside of my work, I volunteer to lead a CMO mastermind group, CMO networking, no agencies allowed. And I put that together through a marketing association. I'm there because I only work with agencies, like I have nothing to sell to the CMOs. So there. And it's interesting, right at the same time as agency owners were saying to me, my sales pipeline is stalled, like everything is dried up, everyone's pausing everything, this and that, what's going on? The CMOs were saying, my sales pipeline, my marketing pipeline, everything stopped. Our customers are flaking out. No one wants to buy anything. They were having the exact same problems. And so, and often the CMOs were under pressure from their CEOs to like sell, push. And the CMO would be, pushing back to say, that's not going to be good for our brand long term. like we're going to destroy all of this brand equity if we're just blasting things out. So, that gets back to empathy, right? Understand where clients are coming from. Most agencies were struggling. Toward the end of 2020, I was seeing people generally were doing better, and some were having record years in spite of the challenges. I think in general, this is one of those, it's hard to predict how complex situations will unfold. Do read the book Meltdown for ideas. The goal is to reduce complexity. And if you can't reduce complexity, find ways to create looser coupling. That is, the steps aren't, immediately next to each other. You find ways to space them out a bit. That gives you more leeway to get things done. But I do remember in late February of 2020, when there was the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, announcement about, basically it's happening. It's not a question of if, but when. And I had previously dated a woman who is a public health epidemiologist. And from that experience, my takeaway was like infectious diseases were less under control than I might have thought as a layperson under usual circumstances. And I also knew from what she had shared, like public health officials do not want to publicly declare that there is an outbreak because they know everyone's going to panic. Mm-hmm. So the fact that that announcement happened and that it was public and they were sharing this and all, I definitely assumed there would be a lot of negative health impacts, but I certainly did not predict the economic impact of the shutdowns and the extended shutdown. So, the idea of the danger of one, you do the best you can.
Yeah.
I focus only on agencies. I have not changed that focus, in part because agencies need help.
And agencies by their nature are diversified. They're different types of agencies, so it's not like every agency is going to shut down or the whole industry is going to shut down. I don't think so anyways. Well,
I would hope not. No.
Yeah, we're running a little short on time. So wrapping things up, I'm a big fan of gratitude. If you look around at your peers and your contemporaries, however you want to define that, who do you respect? Who do you admire that's doing good work out there today?
Someone that I think for the most part, or my clients would know, but others might not, is my colleague Diane Stadlin. We had connected several years ago through volunteering. And in retrospect, it was like a 2-year-long interview that neither of us realized was an interview. And I mean, this is how I found, the best team members, sort of through serendipity or accidentally. But part of that is being intentional about meeting people rather than just, being like, well, stuff going on, can't make time for that. And she's been a great role model and a great team member. She will unfortunately be retiring at the end of this year. She's had a long career working in agencies. So, I regularly say, thank you, Diane. Thank you again. And I hope everyone has that amazing team member or multiple amazing team members who are there to help. And if not, I hope that you do find that person or people.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Karl, this has been great. Thank you so much. I know that you have got, you mentioned it earlier, you've got a course that you are releasing soon for project managers, right? And where can people go to check that out and also learn more about the work that you do?
So the premise on that course, by the way, is there are a lot of people who are deputized project managers, people who are stuck doing PM on top of their regular job. They don't really want to do PM. There's a lot of training out there for people who are full-time project managers. We need that. However, I have created this course, Agency PM 101, Project Management Fundamentals, for people who are stuck doing PM. They're not thrilled about it, but they need to do it well. So I created the course as a way to help people get through those challenges. It's good if you're an agency owner who wants to get PM off your plate. It's good if you're doing project management earlier in your career and you're like, there's got to be an easier way. Yes, there is. That's even a match for people who are experienced PMs. I've included tips that I wish I had learned before becoming a PM. So you can learn more about that, the Agency PM 101 course at sakasandcompany.com. And you can also go there to get all kinds of free resources. I have hundreds of articles on my site. Clients joke that I have an article for everything. Almost. There's still more. I've got like 700 article ideas in the backlog. So there's always more. But if you go to sakasandcompany.com, SAKASAND, the word company.com, check it out. And, running an agency is never going to be easy, but it doesn't have to be so hard.
That's great. Karl, thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
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 And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.